People thought all animals arrived here unrelated. The world began and then came man, all perfectly created. But then someone looked up a tree and said that monkey looks just like me. So it really was a mystery, what I'd learned in natural history.
Good evening, everybody. If you've ever watched the rather one-sided debate that creationists seem to like having against modern science, in particular the debate they like having over biological evolution, you will eventually come to realize that creationists are not actually arguing against biological evolution, but rather they're arguing against their very own version of it. I like to call this creationist version of biological evolution crevolution. Now, unlike biological evolution, which is a scientific theory that explains biological diversity using the mechanism of natural selection, crevolution explains the step-by-step process of how straw men arose from rocks using random chance. And further, unlike biological evolution, which simply gives an explanation for changes in gene frequencies within breeding populations over time in response to changing influences, crevolution is an all-encompassing theory that explains how the universe came into existence, planets formed, life spontaneously evolved from rocks, and eventually achieved its goal of evolving into all of the organisms alive on planet Earth today, and especially humans. Personally, I find it an interesting theory and worth examining, even if it's just for shits and giggles and to point out its obvious flaws. If you're interested, it goes something like this. According to crevolution, the whole universe came into being around 18 to 20 billion years ago, as all of the dust in the universe, out in space, was drawn together into a tiny dot, which was so small as to be non-existent. And then, absolutely nothing exploded nowhere, resulting in the immediate creation of all the stars and galaxies, and somewhere along the line, a whole load of spinning stuff that immediately coalesced and formed the solar system and the Earth.
I said, "Professor, what happened to your dot?" He said, "Well, Hovind, 20 billion years ago, all the dirt in the universe was drawn into this little bitty tiny dot, and it was spinning. It spun faster and faster, and one day, boom, it exploded, Big Bang. And the pieces that flew off became the galaxies and sun, moon, stars, and finally people. Here we are, nothing but stardust."
Not listening. Not listening.
Next, once the planet Earth had finished forming, which was apparently an abrupt event which happened spontaneously and was judged to be complete once the present continental landmasses were in their current positions, complete with mountains at their current modern-day elevations, rivers flowing in their current modern-day paths, and the atmosphere at its current modern-day composition, it began to rain, forming puddles. Now, on one particular day, generally considered by most scientists to have been a Thursday in the second week of March, there was a really big rainstorm, with thunder and lightning and everything. And by absolute random chance, a bolt of lightning just happened to hit a particular puddle that, quite improbably, just happened to contain peanut butter, so that the electrical energy transferred into the puddle spontaneously caused the peanut butter in the puddle to form a modern-day single-celled amoeba.
Evolution teaches that energy, such as lightning or heat, plus matter, can occasionally create new life. If we examine a jar of peanut butter, it contains matter and is exposed to light and heat.
If the theory of evolution was viable, then I should occasionally, by subjecting this to energy, end up having new life. Now we go down to the store, and if I open this jar of peanut butter, maybe not often, but on some occasion, I should find new life inside. And so, when we open the jar of peanut butter, we look in there, there's no new life. And aren't you glad, okay? You and I conduct, collectively, over 1 billion experiments every year, and we've done that for virtually 100 years. and we never encounter new life.
This event, due to the phenomenal odds against it ever happening at all, only ever happened once, and no bolt of lightning has ever before, or ever since, struck a puddle that just happened to contain peanut butter. Creationists, of course, dispute this notion, as they've pointed out that when they've tried recreating this amazingly improbable event, all they get is steam, a lot of blown fuses, and a strong smell of burnt peanuts. To which a great many scientists have responded by saying that they're obviously doing it wrong. Presumably hoping that the creationist researchers might just help weed the stupid genes out of the human gene pool by repeating the experiment by climbing into the bath first, before dropping the toaster in, because it is widely accepted that all scientists hate Christians and are evil because they hate God. Now, fortunately for all life on the planet, it just so happens that that particular puddle didn't dry up. And somehow the descendants of that first amoeba somehow found their way into a river and then into the sea, which is where things start to really get interesting, but not right away. You see, nothing else interesting happened for another few billion years. Unless, of course, you consider amoebas splitting in half to be interesting, in which case that few billion years would be non-stop entertainment. Until one day, which is generally considered by most scientists to have been a Tuesday in September, one of the amoebas decided that it wanted to evolve into a thing that would one day be called a human, and so devised a plan that involved it splitting in two, but keeping the two resulting cells together to form the world's first multicellular organism. Now, some of the other amoebas heard about this and they thought it was a really good idea, and so they rearranged their DNA so that they could produce multicellular organisms as well. You see, the fact that this could have happened by random mutation is completely ridiculous, because everyone knows that mutations are bad, even if on occasions they produce superpowers like telepathy, super strength, and the ability to shoot laser beams out of your eyes. However, scientists forget that amoebas, like other single-celled organisms, have the ability to rearrange the sequence of their own DNA at will when they decide that they want to make certain things happen, because random chance is just too random. Let's listen to an expert explain the whole process.
The bacteria can also apparently re-engineer their own DNA. In other words, bacteria were designed to re-engineer their own DNA. Programmers do this regularly. They design their programs with the ability to reprogram itself. They call this metaprogramming. It takes incredible intelligence and incredible design. So now, why would bacteria be designed with the ability to re-engineer their own DNA? Well, the answer is simple, really. You see, us humans, if we don't have food where we are, we can go elsewhere and forage for food. Bacteria, on the other hand, are microscopic and pretty much stuck wherever they are. So if they don't have their normal food, they now have the ability to re-engineer their DNA to give themselves the ability to digest whatever is at hand.
What? What? What?
Anyhow, once amoebas had worked out how to make multicellular organisms, there was no stopping them, and some of these multicellular organisms decided that they wanted to take it further and work on evolving into plants, while others decided that they wanted to work on evolving into animals. However, scientists have absolutely no idea why some amoebas decided to stay as amoebas, which is why we just happen to have amoebas today. It was around about this time that one of these organisms, completely by luck, just happened to come up with a design for the eye. And this was considered to be such a good idea that it was widely copied. And before you knew it, almost everything had eyes, apart from the amoebas who had been stubborn about staying as amoebas, and the organisms that were working on being plants, who had decided that they didn't need them, as they didn't intend to move around much, as with them being somewhat stuck in the same place all the time, the view would eventually get boring. Anyway, Quite unexpectedly, there was a sudden explosion of new and varied species during a period of time which was called the Cambrian, which is commonly accepted by most scientists as being a Saturday afternoon in late June and not, as commonly believed, a period of history that lasted for about 55 million years. And it was right at the beginning of this period that all the various phyla still around today, such as fish and lizards, as well as a great many that are now entirely extinct, originated.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Passman. I taught 18 years ago. I'm a homeschooler. I still teach biology today and also logic and critical thinking. But you know what? They got a problem at the very bottom. Even Darwin knew about it. He spoke about it in his book, Origin of Species. The very bottom, you have the Cambrian explosion. Down in the very basic rock layers, underneath all the other rock layers on top, where the fossils basically start, already there, you've got fish, amphibians, and reptiles. They weren't supposed to come until hundreds of millions of years later. Is that being taught to our students? Is the difference between historical science and observational science being taught to our students so they can tell the difference between what's fact and what is a story or a belief? Not so much a story, but a belief about the past.
Are you like a crazy person?
Well, by the end of the Cambrian period, the fish were getting a little restless, and some of them realized that not all of the planet was covered by water, and from their homes in the sea they could see the plants upon dry land. And so the fish decided that they were going to evolve into something else and find out what the plants were doing up there. So, like during the 1960s with the space race and the race to the moon, there was an evolutionary race amongst the fish, with all of them competing against each other to be the first to set fin on dry land. For some time, the fish attempted to conquer the land by simply crawling out of the water or up onto the beach. However, this was never going to be a success, as fish have gills rather than lungs, so any fish that tried it would soon die of asphyxiation. There were a great many attempts at this, so many in fact that a great many fish died in what is classed as a mass extinction event. Anyhow, finally, one day, the conquest of land became a reality, and out of a fish egg hatched a fish with legs that immediately made for the surface once it realized that it was unable to breathe underwater. This was such an unexpected thing that not only has it only ever happened once, but it's unlikely to ever happen again. All of the other fish just gave up trying, which is why we still have fish today. Of course, some so-called science experts on the internet will insist that these fish actually, over time, evolved into amphibians, like frogs and newts. But everyone knows that if you hold a frog underwater, it will eventually drown. And besides, frogs and newts are satanic creatures associated with witchcraft, so when scientists mention them, they're simply invoking dark magic and sorcery. Anyway, as soon as the first land creature, which is widely believed to have been a dog, reached the beach, it realized that it had bigger problems, as Ray Comfort explains here.
It's the first dog. He's got a tail, legs, teeth, eyes, and it's good that he's got eyes because he needs to look for a female. He's been blind for millions of years, but now he can see. Right. He's got to find a female. She's got to be evolved at the right place, the right time, with the right reproductive organs and a desire to mate. Because without a female, he's a dead dog.
Oh, I see this sort of thing on YouTube, and you don't think... All right. Sorry, all right.
Now I know that Ray may seem a little confused about the first dog being the first creature to have eyes, but this is only to be expected, as it is well known that there is widespread disagreement between most scientists about evolution, which is only complicated further by the fact that they insist in maintaining that there was nobody there at the time to witness it. Well, despite the obvious advantage of being the only dog in a world full of trees, never having to pee up against the same tree twice and having an endless number of sticks to fetch, the dog obviously decided that it needed to evolve offspring that were something else, if it was ever going to evolve into a person. And that is how we got dinosaurs. It's now widely accepted by most archaeologists that all of the dinosaurs evolved at exactly the same time, and all lived together during a period of history called the Jurassic Era, which lasted for millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And when they had died, the dog went and buried all of their bones, which is how we are able to dig these bones up again as fossils. Most scientists maintain that during this period there were absolutely no people around. However, this runs contrary to the clear scientific evidence that has been unearthed by otherwise respected and highly qualified theologians in the form of fossilized footprints of human and dinosaur tracks that have been found together in the same rock, in places such as Glen Rose in Texas, and certified as genuine by the people who carved them. All of this can be easily uncovered by anyone with the most basic education. Anyway, most of the dinosaurs were killed off by a giant meteorite, which scientists use as an excuse to explain away all of the evidence that they find for Noah's flood, and the ones that were left alive decided to evolve into birds. Though how something like a Tyrannosaurus rex evolved the ability to fly is still a mystery. In fact, it's quite surprising that no scientist has argued that the dinosaurs actually died off because they all jumped off tall cliffs in an attempt to take to the air, not realizing that wings were a major prerequisite for flight. It could be a competing explanation to the dog hypothesis as to how dinosaur bones got buried, as you could imagine that something like a brachiosaur would make quite a crater after falling a few hundred feet. Of course, regardless of how dinosaurs changed into birds, there is no so-called transitional fossils that show them doing so, as Kirk Cameron explains here.
Now, what I'm about to show you does not exist. These were actually created by our graphic artists, but I want you to keep your eye out for this, because this is what evolutionists have been searching for hundreds of years. All right? And if you find one of these, you could become rich and famous. So here's some transitional forms. This is called the crocodile. Can you see this?
God. You stupid, ignorant son of a bitch, dumb bastard! Jesus Christ, I've met some dumb bastards in my time, but you outdo them all.
They're groaning because they know it's true. Anyway, as all the dinosaurs had turned into birds, and we still have birds today, scientists were left with the problem of where all the other organisms came from. And so they came up with the notion that there were these creatures that looked a lot like rats, who decided that they didn't want to be rats anymore, which is why they changed into something else, and became things like cats and frogs and cows and horses, and snakes and cabbages and worms and monkeys. Obviously, this is all complete nonsense, because a rat couldn't possibly give birth to a horse, and it doesn't explain why we still have rats today. Anyhow, while all of this was going on, some of the creatures decided that they didn't like living on land anymore. And so they went to live back in the sea, which caused their legs to fall off, and they became whales and dolphins. Meanwhile, back on dry land, the monkeys went to live in the trees, and ate bananas, even though lots of people on the internet insist that bananas were invented by man. Until one day, generally believed by most scientists to have been a Wednesday, somewhere in Africa, a monkey called Lucy fell out of a tree and decided that she preferred to live on the ground. Now, as it turned out, by pure random chance, Lucy wasn't any particular monkey. She was rather special, because she gave birth to the world's first human beings. And as it turned out, she was extra specially special, because, by pure random chance again, she gave birth to fraternal twins. one of whom was called mitochondrial Eve, and the other who was called Y chromosome Adam. And given the difference in size between people and monkeys, this probably caused her to explode, which is why they found her knee bone so far away from the rest of her. Anyway, in order to make sure that humans continued as a species, Adam and Eve had to have sex with each other, even though they were both brother and sister, and their children would have had to have sex with each other too. Which just goes to show how immoral the theory of evolution is, because it promotes incest. This, of course, raises a few other implications, as is explained here, once again by the leading science researcher and former secondary school teacher, Ian Juby.
Now, some have tried to argue against Adam and Eve, saying their children would be in incest. Now, while that's true, you'll please notice that the evolutionary timeline involves massive incest multiple times. Every time you made any change to a reproductive system, you have to have a completely new, compatible male and female system. The changes have to happen to individuals first, meaning incest for multiple generations, multiple times throughout the evolutionary history. In fact, if you want to get technical about it, evolution would require bestiality. Because technically, it would be like the first innovator was having sexual relations with a different species. I'm your host, Ian Juby.
So yes, to paraphrase, Ian is basically saying that the early humans had sex with monkeys. And of course, this demonstrates the obvious racism within crevolution, because this can be used to explain how we ended up with black people. Let's not forget that Charles Darwin's famous book was originally titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. At the very core of the definition of racism is the concept of favoured races, and the reason that Darwin chose to use the word race in the title of his book has absolutely nothing to do with how the use of certain words change over time, which is why gay people are still, by definition, happy people, and when you say the word faggot, most people immediately think that you're talking about a bundle of sticks, rather than a pork meatball or an 18th century Swedish scientist. Anyway, the early humans that didn't have sex with monkeys moved out of Africa and went to live in caves in Europe during the Ice Age, which was a bit like Noah's flood, just with ice, and is the way that most evolutionary biologists insist that valleys that were clearly carved out of the landscape by huge amounts of rushing floodwater were created instead, and their explanation as to how humans managed to survive the global flood. Because of all the snow during this ice age, these early people evolved to be white, which backs up a clear tenet of both crevolution and Nazism, in that white people are the most evolved people on the planet, and better than all of the other people, and clearly the most favoured race, commonly referred to as the master race. Which brings us to where we are today. Any Bible-believing Christian fundamentalist with the most basic of educations who ventures onto the internet and questions the obvious flaws in evolution, citing the many holes and obvious inconsistencies in the theory of crevolution, will be labelled as an inferior, uneducated idiot, and suffer great humiliation and persecution, which is entirely consistent with Scripture, and validates the truth of the Bible.
Wait a minute, you don't even think it's a theory?
Well, I mean, it's not really... basically, it's not been proven. We had to be put here, some supernatural thing. We couldn't have evolved from such a simple organism into what we are now. There's no way, the way that they think that it all started.
We didn't, evolve from anything. That doesn't make any sense. How can, an African-American person evolve from a white person? We're different skin. You got your supernatural, which would be God, and he actually, he said that he put us here and then put all the animals and plants and stuff to make us survive.
You shall not pass!
Of course, the reality of the situation is very different, and the ridicule heaped upon those that choose to dismiss the demonstrable scientific principles that underpin modern science in favour of bullshit notions such as demons, geocentrism, creationism, and a whole host of other long-debunked, religiously inspired claptrap received their penance, in part because such rubbish was discredited often centuries, if not millennia ago, and because idiots are fun to laugh at. Religious fundamentalists will continue to use crevolution as a way of making their own crazy, unsubstantiated beliefs somehow sound plausible, both to themselves and to one another. But in doing so, all they will continue to do is to either demonstrate just how little they know about the subject matter at hand, or just how far they're willing to stretch their credibility in order to delude themselves and others that an ancient book of folk tales written in the Bronze Age by nomadic tribesmen holds any more truth than Aesop's fables and the Brothers Grimm book of fairy tales. The truth of the matter is that the theory of evolution is a beautifully elegant and simple explanation for biological diversity, and nothing more. It doesn't explain how life or the universe started, even if its acceptance demands answers to these questions. Those explanations exist elsewhere, and are explained by other theories in other scientific disciplines. It doesn't offer a worldview or dictate morality, even if its acceptance causes the person accepting it to question the worldview or morality that they hold to. It's nothing more than a scientific theory that provides a testable mechanism that can be used to explain observations. It doesn't need to be twisted or contorted to fit observed reality with special versions to fit special circumstances. It simply explains why, over time, changes occur in breeding populations as a result of changes in gene frequencies within those populations as a result of changeable influences. Nothing more and nothing less. That simple statement fits perfectly with everything that has ever been observed in biology. And that's because, unlike creationism and its crevolution strawman, it's correct.
Every species' new mutation had a perfect explanation. It seemed the world's inception must predate common perception. Any lack of adaptation is a fatal limitation. So each creature's imperfection over time gets a correction. Meaning animal collections grow unique means of protection. And to fail nature's inspection means immediate rejection, which all leads to the detection